Welcome to the Renegade Yogi podcast experience. Join myself, Zorananda, and this episode's guest as we explore yoga in the modern world. Prepare yourself as we will experience yoga like never before. Hello and welcome to the Renegade Yogi podcast experience. I'm your host, Zorananda, and today I have a very special guest. He is, in my opinion, a tea master, and we have not only a conversation for you today, but also a demonstration in a traditional and ancient tea ceremony. So, I would like you to welcome my guest, Tom Carroll.
Well, thank you for the warm welcome. I appreciate the introduction. I have to say, though, I'm not a tea master. I'm a tea student, right? And,
yeah, I know you're going to say that. That's why I did
it. and that's fine. I mean, I appreciate the flattery. Thank you. So today the setup that is here is for a Gongfu tea ceremony that I've been working with for 5 years, really a lot more actually since the end of 2019 and through 2020 I had some more time on my hands, and it's really taken off for me. I've done quite a bit more with it. Yeah.
Nice. I was first introduced to you through our friend Chris. And I still remember the first tea ceremony that we did together, because I think it was with my fiance Alicia and Chantel and Chris, and just the immediate impact and kind of meditative state that it put me into, as well as everyone else, that I just knew that there was something really special about it. And we hung out earlier today to do the tea ceremony, because I just moved into the neighborhood. I'm only like 2 blocks away from you, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
And and just us hanging out is what brought on the invitation for you to be on my podcast. And we planned for next week, and then spontaneously today came up. So it's really amazing how aligned it is with just like my own practice, my own experiences. And today is about you and your story. And maybe my first question is, what introduced you to the tea ceremony, or what got you into it?
When I think about my childhood and like when I first kind of met tea, I think about my grandmother, who had a place on Lake Huron, and she would drink like Earl Grey tea, and she was very finicky about it. The water had to be just this really hot, perfect temperature, very English style of having tea. And I remember that sometimes I would have tea with her, and I'd get to have pumpkin pie, and we'd be out by the lake and nature and family, and it was, these fond childhood memories that I have of that place and nature and of her. And tea was there, right? That's kind of my first fond memory of tea. Where I first met tea ceremony is quite a jump ahead in life from there. So I'll briefly talk about where tea was in my life between the first ceremony and there. And I really started to drink a lot more tea probably in high school a bit, but more so like in university. And it's like I liked it because it tasted good. I mean, I wasn't against coffee. I mean, I still have coffee sometimes, but it was, um, I guess, kind of going after the caffeine aspect of it, and it was very fast paced, like a to go cup of tea on the run. I wanted it to taste good, and I wanted it to keep me awake so I could study or do whatever. It wasn't anything that I slowed down for or had like a deeper appreciation of, like when I was a child with my grandmother in nature. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so, I mean, it was okay, right? And then years later, um, I mean, I feel like I really have to build up to your question.
Yeah, yeah, of
There's
course.
like a
No.
whole bunch of stuff happening there.
Yeah.
So probably that gap from university to like having um my first tea ceremony is probably like about like 10 years, right?
Yeah.
And during that time, so a lot of that time I was pretty heavily addicted to like drugs and partying all the time, and eventually I cut that stuff out, right, and found certain paths that helped me kind of realize what was going on in my life and that it was out of control. And I mean, one of those things, and like in the community that we're in, and in a roundabout way, how we know each other, like would be because I started participating in the yoga community in Edmonton, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I really liked this hot yoga for quite a while, and it was beneficial like for my recovery. It kept me like healthy, something to do, right? And someone who I had met through that circle was also doing massage, and I was getting massage from her, and then she canceled one day. She's like, oh, I'm busy, but here, go to this person. So I went to this person, and it was my friend Erin, and um, we had a good chat. And then she was going to do some retreat somewhere and came back, and she told me about this tea ceremony that she'd found a few times. And I was just like, remembering drinking tea like when I was in university. It's like, oh, tea, yeah, it's good, but yeah, nothing too, didn't like, oh wow, I gotta check it out. And then she invited me over for tea one time, and I came over, and she had another friend there too, I believe, and it was kind of wintry, and I remember, yeah, so there's no speaking, and I was like, oh yeah, okay, I'm fine with that. And then the tea ceremony started, and all I could think about was like the tea like I used to drink in university, or that I was still kind of doing at that point in time, where it's like I needed a lot of honey, and I needed to be, all these things, like, I wanted to know all the caffeine information about it, but I'd already agreed to this silence. So it was just like, I hope she knows that I like honey in my tea, right?
That's what I was thinking about earlier to do today when I was drinking it. I was like, I always put honey in, right?
Yeah.
And it was so interesting to like bypass that and
Yeah.
to taste everything that I was tasting, and
Mm-hmm.
and just because the quality of your tea is like far significant than anything you'd buy in the store,
Yeah.
right? That you don't need the sweetener at all with this tea. Like
No.
it has such an amazing aroma, and it has all these different layers of taste that it's it's not something that's just like immediately just only bitter, where like
Right.
you get a rooibos or a red tea or black tea or something from the store, and then it's just like you can't help but put some kind of sweetener in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I guess one thing I noticed about being in recovery, and then I started to notice this into other aspects, and it's kind of coming along my tea timeline to where this plays into there too. And um, when I would go into like a 12-step room, and there'd be no fee, and nobody be trying to make money off me, and yet this identification was happening. I could hear kind of my story with other people, and I knew that what they were saying was a legit expression from their heart or their own experience. And I was able to leave a donation, kind of like what goes around at church, and it just keeps the the doors open, but it's not required. Like anyone can go there. I mean, probably most people that go to those meetings don't leave much or anything because they don't have anything when they first get there.
Yeah.
But that type of learning spoke to me. It was a value outside of money, and it was like intrinsically valued to me, like just so powerful, right? Like it allowed me to change my life and become employable, become a good person, and deal with my own stuff and be accountable to myself and to others, right? Um, so that's kind of how I met recovery, and that was the first way that I met that was like that. So I refer to that as kind of the language of recovery. And shortly into my tea journey, not too far in, like the first year I had tea with Aaron a few times. And obviously this is going over to a friend's house, so there's no like fees happening or anything, right? But I noticed like being able to sit in silence and really notice what's going on inside me. It's one of those practices, and there's other ways to get there too, but just that sitting down and not doing, not needing to talk, and then having something mindful to do, like either to receive or accept tea, for example, or sorry, to pour or to receive tea. Um, it all that the chatter just kind of went away, and I could see some things that were happening for me. And I mean, I experienced myself and other people having like emotional releases, and things that they're avoiding would just kind of come up, right? It opens heart space is what I refer to it as, right? His emotions seem to be kind of freed out. Not all the time, but that's been some of my experience, right? And learning to get out of my own way and to be quiet and to listen, like those are like, you know, all lessons within one word, but they're extremely difficult and profound. For me, that's been my experience. So at the end of 2015, I had by this point in my life had saved up enough money with a good job. I was going to go explore the world, and I bought a ticket to Thailand, and I had a few friends over. Actually, Aaron and then another friend of mine, Marcus, were over one day, and we had tea. And I heard Marcus talking about wanting to go to the tea center, and I'm like, I'm going to Asia anyway. Why wouldn't I just reach out to them and see if I could go there? And the Tea Sage Hut in Taiwan. At the time, I wrote to them, and I was talking to Sam at the time. He was working there in Shen through emails, and I kind of told them some of my story, and that I was having some really good experiences with tea, and I felt it was like a practice that I wanted to continue and learn more about. And I asked them if there was any space open, and they got back to me with a few windows that were during my trip, and I kind of chose the earlier window. So I was in Thailand for a little while, and then I went to Taiwan for 9 days. And the first man that served me tea was Buddha, and he is just this amazing person. I'll have to send him this podcast, because I mean I could go on for hours about my deep appreciation for the work that he's done. And he has a magazine that comes out every month called Global Teahot, and there's like a community based in Taiwan, but really around the world, that, you know, participates in the writing of this magazine on tea stuff. And I've written a few articles in there myself, and I really enjoy reading what other people in the community have to say. And this magazine comes out with some tea every month, so there's tea articles on that tea and articles on other tea stuff, which is great for me, because I can geek out on tea for a long time. But like a spiritual approach, right? I mean, that's what I'll call it. I mean, people can decide for themselves, but
because I think that's almost like I can get the sense of like people listening is like, well, what's so special about tea, right? And because it's so nonchalant in the Western world of just go to Tim Hortons or go to wherever, get yourself a tea or make yourself a tea at home, and you're just drinking it, and there's like this known comfort of it, right? Of like, oh yeah, I'm gonna like have tea and relax. And then there's this level of tea, right? Of ceremonial practice and why it can be so heart opening and why it can be so emotional and touching through having this exchange with someone where we're seated silently, we're not talking, and yet there's that urge to at the beginning, you know, it's like, well, why are we silent? Oh yeah, we're silent because it's all about the experience with the tea. And then in your own practice of going beyond that, right? So then when you're taking in this substance, that innately it is doing something within you, right? And there's a subtlety to it that gets appreciated more and more. And so, though I called you a master and you're humbly denied and said, no, I'm a student, have you in your experience like some kind of like profound experiences, say on your own tea ceremony, where maybe there is a sense of guidance, communication, or intuition, or something that comes through that maybe wouldn't otherwise come through without it?
Well, it's kind of an interesting answer. One of the things that I asked the first time I was at the Teahot, because it was also my introduction into a way of meditation that's also been like profound for me.
Mm-hmm.
So Buddha had studied with Goenka, who was when he was alive, and he incorporates 2 hours of meditation at the Tea Sage Hut at the time, and so I kind of asked a similar question to Shen, who was a more senior student of Buddha's there at the time, because I was like, I asked him, I'm like, so when you meditate, do you like feel connected or like closer to God or anything? And his answer to me was kind of like metaphorically what my answer to you is, and it's like he was like, no, but I notice, like, you know, I can hear things, and I can, you know, just the senses are deeper, right, on the most basic things. I mean, maybe basic isn't the right word, but his answer didn't quite like make sense to me, right? Because I'd kind of thought at that point in time that the point of meditation was to be like, you know, get these God shots and like, you know, have like superpower, clear direction in your life. And what I've come to notice about meditation and tea is that kind of what I said earlier, it helps me get out of my own way, and also more aware of what's going on. It's kind of like the mindfulness aspect of it isn't what I'm seeking, but it helps me to see where I am,
Mm-hmm.
in a sense. Like, okay, you know, like even any sitting practice, right? If I sit down for a while and I have all these things going on in my life, kind of like they're in a mangled cloud above me, after I sit for a while, they kind of fit the puzzle, and then that picture comes down into me, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
And then I think that's just the surface stuff, right? And then deeper and deeper and deeper. So, I mean, I've noticed things about my smell and my taste, and different sensations in my body, and like feeling the room around me, and having like acknowledgement of other beings being present for this. And I mean, like, you know, could be the microbes that are growing on the tea that ages tea, that I really like aged tea, by the way. It's great.
Mm-hmm.
You know, noticing the influences and the languages that teas experienced before it came here. You know, like the mountain, the wind, the sunshine, the animals, the bugs, all the other plants that grow around it, the people who pick it, you know, the people who process it. And um, what's really different about having tea in this way um, is that it's center stage, right? It's not something I do on the side. It's not in a to-go cup as I'm driving, or off to the side in a while I got a textbook open, or trying to
Mm-hmm.
down it on a quick break. And I do have tea in those circumstances still, right? And it's okay. And I think it's okay because I also have tea like this, right? Because I know, right?
Yeah. And that's really what I noticed earlier today is like the procedure, and um, how precise everything was, especially when it came to the opening of the tea ceremony, right? And so that is what I found really beautiful because there's a very precise step by step process on how you start the tea ceremony. And so, for the lucky viewers, we did record the opening of it. So, right now, we'll just blend right into the opening part of the tea ceremony. The one thing I miss and I've had in my mind to really get back into, when I went to India the last two times, and a part of like the Kanda Yoga lineage that Chris and I were both trained in, our teacher Vishvaji, when he's in the ashram, does these daily fire puja rituals, where we all gather around a fire and we chant these like old Sanskrit Vedic mantras while offering to the fire, right? Where I see this in a very similar vein that um, you have this like beautiful mantra music playing in the background, and you have the opposing element, water instead of fire, but you have this like giving and receiving element, right, where you are giving into the vessels, to be received by the body. And I just thought that was really a really beautiful reminder for myself, um, because I know with me I have a tendency to like ebb and flow out of my practice. If I go to the ashram, I'm like fully in it, and I
Yeah.
just like there's
Yeah.
no deterring me from it. And like even if there's a small voice that's like, oh, you should take a rest today, I'm just like, psh, like nah, like I'm doing everything like full on. But then as soon as I get home, that voice of like, oh yeah, you don't have to do it, just like gets louder. And
Mm-hmm.
then I wane away from doing the ceremony. So this has been a really nice reminder of like how to get back into the ceremony.
Right.
So I'd love to actually be able to do like the fire ceremony with you,
Yeah, that'd be cool.
to
I'll check
like
it
kind
out.
of share worlds.
Yeah, yeah. I'll
And
actually do it.
that's what I've been really loving about this podcast is that, to see how these different practices kind of meld together, right, from these different cultures, and
Mm-hmm.
how us as Westerners, in the crazy Western world that we're in, have been able to find these practices and bring them into our life, and to be able to appreciate something that was never really a part of our world,
Mm-hmm.
and that's like what we were talking about earlier, I think. And yeah.
So when you're talking about daily practice, I can really relate to what you're saying about the ashram, and um, tea is really easy for me to have a daily practice, especially like when I'm home. Like I'll have a nice setup, kind of, or what I think is a nice setup, and really get a lot out of that. Whereas like my meditation is harder to
Mm-hmm.
do that like 2 hours of sitting every day. Like if I go, but I'll try to go to a Vipassana like once a year and do a 10-day sit, and then I'll go a few months with a practice maybe, and then it tapers off, right? And so I relate to what you're saying about that voice, and that's the front lines, right? That's where the fight is, so to speak, and that's where the real change and the growth happens, I think. So,
Mm-hmm.
thank you for reminding me about Vipassana. And so one thing I wanted to continue on, I didn't quite um, finish that thought train on where I was talking about the language of recovery, and I was getting into like this. I felt a very trusted space in recovery because I could share my experience. Somebody understood it. I got some guidance from a few people. Also, I heard some other people's stuff, and I helped keep a safe container for them, and I've been able to give back in
Mm-hmm.
that sense too, right? So the chairs are there. If I can afford to leave something, then it helps somebody who has no money to go there who needs it, right? So when I went to the tea sage hut, um, that's what it was like. And like even thinking about it now, I'm like getting a bit emotional on how amazing that is that you could go somewhere and learn about this beautiful practice and sink in, and it's free, no
Mm-hmm.
money, and I can leave a donation if I find merit in it, right? So I was able to do that, and it's kind of, I love that concept of like, if somebody leaves a donation, then it's a gift for the future people who get to experience it, right? And they leave a donation because they've had merit in the experience. Like there's something in it that's profound for them, so it's a gift based on this appreciation of this way and this knowledge, and this in self journey, I guess, for all of us. And I went from there immediately to Burma and did my first Vipassana, which was also done in the same manner, like with donation and teachings and free. And um, it's so profound to me that like now, after sitting with tea, and this is like my 7th year now, um, that when I serve tea publicly, that I incorporate that, right? I want to keep that spirit, that Dhamma or Dharma moving forward
Mm-hmm.
in a sense. So like I am comfortable and happy to give tea by donation, and then I keep those donations separate, and it goes to pay for the space for the next people to experience it. And I find that it's a beautiful concept, and it's hard for some of the people that I work with and I've had spaces with to like, what? They're like, they don't understand it, right? Because it's like, no, you need to charge a set amount of money for people coming to class. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? Just like there's nothing wrong with having honey and tea.
Yeah.
It's just like, this is the way that speaks to me. So that's when I do things that way.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that kind of completes that language of recovery thought. So things that work in that sense, that's what I refer to them as. And I, as I had said to you earlier, I like really want to do some writing on this, and maybe that, I mean, I hope it'll turn into a book, right, at some point. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that attitude towards capitalizing on things is this overt sense of offerings as in a business model, and the thing that's lost, I think, to most people's minds is the transmission of tradition, right? That the reason why you're offering it is because of the goodness that's come out of it for you, and to one sense how it saved you, and then honoring the tradition that has led to this point that it's come to you, right? That all the synchronicities came into play for you to decide to go to Taiwan and go to the tea school and to learn from these masters who have been doing it all their life, and it's been passed on in that way, and where we become these sort of forerunners in translating that tradition to people in the Western world, that for some reason in our karma and our dharma we have the privilege to do that. And and so this is what I like to explain to people who try to accuse me of like cultural appropriation, where they're like, oh, like what you're doing, you're just stealing from these people who and you're just trying to capitalize on it and stuff like that. And I say, okay, well, it's come into my life for a reason, and partly I didn't have control over that because I, to one degree, wasn't searching it out, and it synchronistically came into my life. So with that, with my dive into it and with my participation with it, I now have a responsibility regarding how it's transmitted, right? And so my first learning lesson was going through the gamut of like the commercialized sense of it, and going through studios and wanting to teach workshops and retreats, to then coming to full realization that the original transmittance of this is through that similar vein of through charity, through donation, and openness and merit, right? Where if indeed my path is mastery of this, then my teaching of it has to reflect that mastery in the merit of what you get out of it, right? And so that's what I find so fascinating with the tea, because the merit is not just in the ceremony, it's also in growing it. It's also in harvesting it. It's also in then the process of curing it and drying it, and then storing it, right? And then preserving it. And so that's where I can understand where you say, oh, I'm still a student, right? Because there's also these other steps that you really haven't participated in yet that I'm sure is part of your path, right? And that's what gets opened up to you when you get recognized more, and and I think it's part of that merit, right? When more and more people start coming to you and they start going, oh man, like Tom, I've been having these beautiful experiences, that like merit is building in that synchronicity where intuitively I think that's what's going to be picked up by these like tea masters. And that's how I've seen it with yoga as well. The more work you do on yourself, the more like these yoga masters are in tune, and suddenly you just like fall into the grace of their teaching, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like what you're talking about kind of reminds me of when I was at the Teahot the first time I was there. Um, I was told that if there was some burning question, that I would be able to have some time and ask that question to Buddha. And right away, I was like, "Oh yeah, I got a question," which I find pretty hilarious right now. Right, I've only been there for like 10 minutes, and I can't. And then I would kind of, over the time I was there, would formulate this question. And then the first day I was there, Wuda had this talk on like shamanism in the modern world, and like all the question and much more questions that I didn't realize I had were all answered there. And I was like, oh, I don't have a question anymore. And then something else would happen. Then I'd come up with a question and don't have a question anymore. It's answered. Like every time, man, the whole time I was there, I kept coming up with like things I wanted to ask, and then it would be like answered. And then, I mean, finally, the last day, I was talk. He asked me if there's anything I wanted to know after the last breakfast, and I was like, well, what do I do when I'm the most tired, and I'm away at work, and it's really a struggle to keep connected with like a yoga practice or meditation or tea practice, whatever it is. And his answer was sangha, which is like community, right? And I was just like, wow, I went across the world to find out that my answer is community, and I've got like this great community at home, which, I mean, was ironic and beautiful at the same time, right? Yeah. So if you can't tell, I have a lot of admiration for Buddha and his work with Global Teahot, and I support and love his dream of building a Life Meets Life center. That's going to be this basically tea school. He wants to get land and do a lot of things in that sense. And COVID's kind of like, I don't want to say helped, but it's like the tea sage had it kind of shut down, and now they're at this place where they can like rebuild and kind of focus things differently. And I'm really happy for the way that his teachings are still coming out. He's doing some stuff online, so I would recommend that if anybody listening to this wants to learn more about tea, to go to the Global Teahot website, and there are courses there to take. And I also just want to point out something else too. Like, I would go there and I would refer to Buddha as a master, and he would say that the masters are all dead and they're in the stars, right? So
Yeah.
I mean, he had a business card at the time that student said student right on his business card, right? So I really appreciate that from him, and he's had a lifetime of studying tea, where I've had a few years, right? And also want to have a shout out to the good tea merchants out there, right? The people that sell really clean tea, and I can go into some of the aspects of what makes the tea.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask next is, particularly the tea that we're drinking now. I apologize for just the listeners not being able to see, But of course, this video is up on YouTube. You have every opportunity to watch the video as well. But yeah, so why not explain the tea that we're drinking today?
Sure. This tea is a tea that I didn't like at first, or I didn't understand at first, or bloomed and opened up later in my life. I bought this tea. I think it came out in 2016 or 2017. Red Sun Rising is the name of it, and it is a Gongfu red tea. So most of us in the West, including myself a few years ago, didn't understand what red tea is. So red tea is what we in the West refer to as black tea. So that's often a correction that needs to be made at first when we're learning about tea. And it's referred to that way because the color of the tea is usually a reddish color, like the liquid.
Mm-hmm.
So that was something that was lost in translation or translated poorly, or anyway, it's something. If I can help correct that a little bit, I will.
And yeah, keep going.
So red tea can be any varietal of tea that is processed to like a maximum oxidization level. So when I say that, I mean like any like oolong varietal plant or any like pu'er varietal plant can be processed into a red tea. That being said, it makes it a kind of a big genre, but it's the same. So kind of like how it was explained to me, and it makes sense, is like, so if I take a bite out of an apple and then that apple like turns brown, like the brownest it can get, and then I would kill green stage or whatever, right? Then I would process it, wok fry it, or steam it, however it's being done, and then that would be kind of in a nutshell with a bunch of stuff missing, red tea.
Interesting.
So this in particular red tea is Gongfu red tea, which is usually a green tea will be picked, like the bud and the first two leaves, usually quite small, right? The leaves are small, they're fresh buds and fresh two leaves. So a Gongfu red tea is basically green tea, but it's processed like red tea. So I have a Gongfu pot here, and the leaves are like quite small, as you can kind of see there, right? Whereas the other red tea is like maybe like a really old pu'er, or like an old tree pu'er, where the leaves could be up to as long as my finger.
Mm-hmm.
So this tea has taken me a few years to get into and learn, and I bought this big basket of it. So I had lots of it, and I ended up giving quite a bit of it away. And I was looking at it today, and I'm like, man, I really like this tea now. I mean, I'm glad that I gave a bunch of it away, but as my tea journey has gone forward, like now using ginbin, so a silver kettle, and using really nice duokui pot here, I know that those will affect the water and affect the tea differently, right? So now that this tea that I didn't understand, now I can see another angle of it, and it's really beautiful, and it's an amazing tea.
Yeah, and I think that goes into like what I was saying earlier about the education and the mastery, right? Where maybe you don't have access to the experience of going through the process of how it's harvested and how it's cultivated and how it's processed, that where your mastery is in the ceremony itself, right? And the very specific details of the ceremony, like you were saying, like the type of kettle that you're using, the type of pot that you're using, the technique of pouring, and the vessel that you're using. And so then and how a realization has come out of, oh, I like this tea now, and it's showing me so much because I have these other vessels and I have these other pots and I have these other things that is showing me a life of the tea that I wasn't able to see before, right?
Mm.
And so then, like, as you go through your journey with teas and as you start to um, experience other teas, you start to see the subtleties and the levels of each tea from
Right.
all the different pots. And then maybe uh, there's going to be teas that are different where you're not using this little pot, right? Where you're using a
Oh, for
bigger
sure.
pot, right?
Yep.
Say if it's a black tea or if it's a green tea or if it's a oolong or whatever, even though
Yeah.
it's probably all the same thing. You're just looking at me, you're like, yeah,
Yeah.
names are all the same thing. But yeah, and what I appreciate is just your knowledge on it, right? So your the actual names of the teas and the region where they come from. So
I yeah, I feel like a novice in a lot of this, right?
mhm.
The continuation of practice has a lot of things have unfolded for me, but I'm still very young in this journey. Yeah, I'm dwelling a little bit on something that you said earlier that kind of comes up sometimes too, is appropriation,
Mhm.
right? So my take on that is it's okay for me to share my experiences, right, and not claim something in somebody else's name, right? It's okay for me to go and share tea, but I mean, I'm not a Zen monk. I'm not, you know, I'm not on a student of this lineage that has like a set master or guru to learn from. There's tea brothers and sisters that I've learned from, and in the same sense, if somebody asks me to apprentice, which has happened a few times, right? Like my response is like, you know, I can be your tea brother, and you're welcome to have tea with me, and I can show you some things that I've learned, but I also point people in the right direction, which for me right now is like the global Teahot courses are really like, you know, pinned down pretty good.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so I wanted to say that, and then also if maybe continue on about some of the qualities of what a good tea is, and I don't mean that good and in the sense that there's bad teas. I think any tea can be a good tea. It's okay, but the things that I look for when I buy a tea are the qualities of like a living tea. So I want teas that have a good relationship with the farmers,
Mhm.
right? I mean, the price I pay, they have a pretty good relationship with the merchants.
Yeah.
Um, and that being said, not tea doesn't have to be expensive, and really, if that's a whole little side story there, but so a good relationship with the people who are making a living off the tea, like the merchants, the farmers in particular. Um, good relationship with the land that the tea is grown in, right? So a lot of times with plantation tea, the teas are clones, right? And they might live 25, 35 years and nothing else is permitted to grow with them. Even if they're organic, it's like rows and rows of clone trees, right?
Mhm.
So having something that's grown from a seed and something that's as wild as can be, right? Like it can still be like a garden, so to speak. There's a like an ecological, I don't know the right term for it, so I don't want to say it wrong, but like let's say that there's other things that are permitted to grow in with the tea, right? Creating somewhat of a like some
Like
diversity of,
biodiversity. Yeah.
yes, right.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've been lucky enough to see some wild tea trees, like the ones that I've seen. Well, I wouldn't say they're quite wild, but they were in Indonesia, and I could definitely see other things growing on them and in and around them, right? Um, so that's important. And then, you know, as hand processed and picked as possible. Um, also, like no, obviously no chemicals, right? Like if it took, like I would eat organic food, not everything organic, but I mean, like I would only eat organic berries for, in a sense, because you can't wash the chemicals off a berry without wrecking the berry, so to speak, right?
Mhm.
So I didn't think about tea in that sense for years, right? And it just kind of hit me like, how did I miss that, right? Because you never get it off the leaf, right?
Yeah.
So there's pesticides, there's chemical fertilizers, and there's herbicides, right? So tea that doesn't have those. And also even organic fertilizers, tea without fertilizer. Tea that doesn't get irrigated will have roots that goes deep into the earth, right? And then there's mineral content coming out in the leaves, and it's like it can take care of itself, right?
Yeah.
And well, I don't want to say that too strongly because there is this relationship between people and tea, and I mean, humans have definitely helped tea still to be here, right? But allowing the roots to grow deep is a good thing. Um, yeah. So that being said, how does a person know that those qualities are in their tea or not? I mean, I've been drinking tea for 7 years, and off a first taste, I wouldn't be able to tell you, right?
Yeah.
So I rely on merchants that are honest, and there's a lot of merchants out there that aren't, right? So there might be three places that I buy tea from, right? And again, like the only plug out I'm willing to give is Global Teahot.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So I really have a deep appreciation for that. Now, I have done some side by side tasting of stuff that I know is like has agrochemicals in it and stuff that doesn't. And some of the things that I've noticed, which would surprise me and shock me a little bit, like sometimes I'll get like a metallic taste, and I would almost think that that's a chemical, yet it seems to be that irony taste seems to be more present in tea that is allowed to be more like a living tea or as many qualities as possible, right? And that's
Yeah.
not a blanket for everything, but that's one thing, a generalization that I've noticed. And I mean, I'm not an expert on that, but I do notice that I have drinking some teas where I feel sick after and they're not clean. And now when I sit and I drink tea and tea is the focus, I notice how I feel 15, 20 minutes, half an hour later, right? Like that is also important to me. Like what's changing in my energy? How is tea moving with me? How am I integrating this experience, right? And I believe that tea that is not allowed to have a biodiversity in the same way as like a wild tea, like a cloned agrochemical plantation tea. I mean, it just doesn't do that, right? Like what we were talking about earlier. It's like I'm used to that one effect, and so it's like it's overgrown, like it's bred just to have that sort of like what we know in the West is like a caffeine experience shot, and it's so like non-tasteful. I have to mix it with honey and other things to get it down,
Yeah.
right?
Like even earlier when I was going home, I just very clearly felt at peace and calm, and it was, and it's not that it was particularly coming from the tea. It's not like the tea was making me that way. It's like it was amplifying these inner qualities that I already have, right? That can be overshadowed sometimes by stressors and just situations in your life that are going to cause you to be flustered and frustrated and whatever, right? Where having the opportunity to sit in ceremony, drink this tea, really experience it through the senses, like you were saying earlier, that when I was on my way home, I was just like, wow, I really feel the inner work that I have done over the years is just shining through. It's like it just like helped polish the glass, so to speak. Yeah, which is really really beautiful, and I think that is that missing element from commercialized tea, right? Because there's this very overt direction of manufacturing the stuff for a particular intention, the caffeine. It's like
Mm-hmm.
green tea. It's healthier caffeine. Rather
Yeah.
than like, um, this tea from this province in China, from this farm, and this lineage for this kind of ceremony, right? And I think there's something to say about bringing that to light to people who are, avid tea drinkers and appreciate it, that they can add a ceremonial element
Right.
to it.
So this morning when you were over and we had tea, we had a side handle bowl tea ceremony, and the I don't know if emphasis is the right word, but sitting in silence, and the vessels that the tea are in are larger, and things are maybe a bit simpler, and it's easy to have a strong heart space in bowl tea ceremony, and that's the purpose of it to me, is like connection with nature, open heart, give from the heart, receive from the heart,
Mm-hmm.
right? And not so much on like, although there is technique, but not so much focus on that. Like that stuff seems more of a second, like a distant second, where
Mm-hmm.
Gongfu tea has all the same elements too, but it was developed by martial artists, right? And it was done to find that you kind of the taking those concepts, but also like a large focus on making the best cup of tea possible, right? And like the movements are like Chinese calligraphy movements, and I mean, it feels like there's some Tai Chi stuff going on as it happens,
Yeah.
and I'm early in this and bumbling around, right? Sometimes I feel like this flow, and I'm like, whoa, this is amazing, and then bumble, okay, I gotta learn something, right?
Yeah.
But like the clay, for example, like just to go into a little bit of the depth. So the Yixing clay um, is ore from a mountain, right? So it's different than like river clay, and there's some properties that make it quite good for having tea. It's light. It is double porous, which means it holds heat well, and there's no lead in it, which is something that you'd obviously don't want lead in your clay if you're going to be
Mm-hmm.
drinking liquids out of
Yeah,
it.
definitely.
Um, so they'll take the ore out of the mountains, and it, I think, sits around. This is an area I need to learn more about. So this, I believe, it sits around for maybe a few years, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then they take it into smaller pieces and they put it in water for maybe a few months or a few weeks, something like that, and then they make the clay, and then it's okay to make a pot with, right? And then the potter is like that's a mindful school all on its own, right? Like there's
Yeah.
some real mastery happening there, and they say that if you have like a Yixing pot, that if you have the same kind of tea in it, say for 30-40 years, like let's say I had aged pu'er in a pot for 30-40 years, and eventually I get to the point where I could just pour water in the pot and not have tea in it, but tea would come out. So I
Yeah.
mean, to think about how long it took to figure that stuff out,
Mm-hmm.
like how many generations went into fine tuning all of that, right? And then like the cups are porcelain. Like these cups are probably in the area of about 100 years old,
Yeah.
right?
Wow.
And yeah, and I always want to say like tea doesn't need to be expensive, right? But I do have some really good teaware because it helps me to learn more about the tea. But like in bowl tea, for example, I can have like some really basic stuff. I found some really nice bowls at the Asian supermarket that are like $3, and they hold heat well, and they're white, and I can see the color of the tea. There's a lot of really nice properties about them that are amazing, right? And I think with bowl tea, that's what I have done publicly, right?
Mm-hmm.
And people are so um, taken with it. I don't know what it is. The same thing probably it was with me, just to slow down, experience community with people without speaking, but still holding space for everybody. And yeah, I kind of went on a ramble there.
That's okay. Yeah, and I think, you know, what can be transmitted here is really how we can introduce ceremony where certainly people don't have to get the entire set. They don't have to kind of replicate what they're seeing here, what you're doing here. But to know that even if you're going to a store, if you're going to a restaurant, if you're going to a Tim Hortons or wherever to get tea, that the element of ceremony can still be there, you know, as even just like a starting point where you're thinking to yourself, okay, I want to appreciate this substance that has been around for, you know, thousands of years and celebrated in many different cultures, specifically in like China and Japan and Taiwan and the Asiatic countries, that there's something that I can do to be a part of that, you know, even if we're not even from those countries, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like even for us, right, where there's a moment that we can take in just ceremonializing the tea in that moment, right? And I think that's what can start to build towards, okay, I'm gonna get like a nice tea set, I'm gonna get a nice tea, and maybe once a week I'm just gonna like, it's gonna be a Sunday, I'm gonna sit down, I'm gonna make some nice tea, I'm gonna pull out my tea set, I'm
Totally.
gonna, you know, and then that's where the synchronicity of the energy of that whole tradition starts to come in, where I'm sure there's people who are gonna have these experiences and then have a profound experience and be like, you know what, I've got to look into this some more. I've got to research some better teas and research the history of this, which is really beautiful. Which, you know, is what your path is, and what you've been able to share with people. So
yeah, and kind of being in this time we live in with the technology that's available. Like, I mean, this podcast we're making right now, right? This is video. One of the areas that I've ventured into, which is, I'm sure, a new area for tea altogether, right? Is like virtual tea sits. And you know, there's been a number of us in the tea community and the global tea community who have met each other and reached out to each other virtually, and one of the catalysts for this happening, if not the catalyst for this happening, was COVID. For me, that was a profound aspect of my tea journey. A brother of mine, tea brother, who I met him in Bali. We had some like epic tea sits there, and I mean, I think we were sitting once, and like a monitor lizard like started strolling by, and I was just like, what? Right, like under a bridge or something.
yeah.
And yeah, we had some cool sets. So I'll give Samson a shout out there. And he's this amazing human being. He's a teacher, American. He's a teacher in China, and as most of us know, the lockdown was pretty severe in China at first, and we were kind of chatting a bit on Instagram, and then we reached out and we had a tea ceremony together, and I was really blown away by how deep and profound it was, even though I was looking at a computer screen, right?
Yeah.
And it was amazing. So going from that point, I started to reach out to some other people that I had met in Taiwan when I was there. That my friend Turte in Finland, had a reach out with him, and I mean he was, I think, being cautious and staying home because maybe his friend had COVID or something at the time, or something like that. Anyway, so we had a tea sit, and he gave me some Gongfu pointers that I'm grateful for. And then it started like reaching out to people that I hadn't met yet. Like we've all got those people on Instagram. It's like, oh, that person's clicked and liked, and I've clicked and liked. So it was like, hey, let's get together and have some tea, right? And so I reached out to a friend in, where was the first? Oh, yeah, Leing in Scotland, who's now like my dear tea sister, right? She's like this amazing soul that is now my friend, and I mean we've only hung out virtually, right? And so we shared some tea, and then she invited her friend Laura, who's now my friend too, and we had our little kind of like, what did they call that group, like Legends of Teaville or something like that. But we would like hang out and have tea like early in the quarantine, and I was like at home because all of the work in my trade was like shut down, right?
Yeah.
For COVID. And then I was like, oh, wait a minute, there's people locally here, right? Like not so much in Edmonton actually, but like I have some tea friends in Calgary, and so I was reaching out to them, and I was reaching out to specifically my friend Kat in Calgary, and she was like linked into this other group in the States that was getting together that Mariana was heading up there, so that was kind of a bigger group. Oh, I also want to give a shout out to Rachel, because I remember reaching out to her too. She's also in Colorado, and was like kind of that was one of my first virtual sits too. And yeah, so these groups started happening, and then it was like, okay, there's a full moon sit, or it would be like somebody would host on like Monday, and then Wednesday, or and I started hosting maybe once or twice a week and tuning into the other sits when I was home, and it was really strong. Like you had this community going, right? And then seeing different ways to do it virtually, and it was like everybody was serving themselves tea, so practicing serving, but also giving and holding space for others, right? And there was kind of like the talking stick style, so everybody would be muted, but one person would talk. Or, I mean, my favorite, if it can be hard to pull off sometimes, is just open mic, and just let the conversations go, and people can kind of talk themselves, but also like you get those little like laughs or gestures of support and stuff, and those are important to hear in conversations. So I really like doing it in that way. And then, I mean, that went on for like a year pretty much, right? And then I noticed that some of these people started to incorporate this into like, okay, that's what they're doing now, like business wise, and
Yeah.
it kind of grew out of that. And a part of me was sad because this language of recovery, so to speak, was now being monetized. But at the same time, I mean, I'm really happy for the people that are able to share tea with other people, and there's a lot of people tuning in to these brothers and sisters of mine who are doing that in that format, right? So I don't need other people to be like me. I understand my language and how it needs to work for me, and I love them dearly, right? So yeah, and I noticed some more. So now, kind of what had been happening, I guess, earlier in this year, 2021, was would do like a Zoom sit, and then it would also be like a live feed in a Facebook group, and then people could tune into it later if they were on different time zones or whatever, and kind of have their own ceremony, even though it wasn't live anymore with what was going on. So it was this interesting way to connect. And I feel like that first big wave of that is kind of past, especially now. Like, I mean, most places in the States are opened up, right? So people are like, at home less and probably really happy to be out doing stuff. And so now where my tea sits are when I'm not working and I'm home is I drink tea like every day pretty much, right? Like pretty rare that I would miss a day. Often I'll have like two sits, like a bowl tea in the morning and Gongfu in the afternoon or evening, and probably half or more of those are virtual, but they're more like some real solid connections like I've met. And some people that I met in Taiwan, like my Russian friend Ming, or my friend Matt, who lives in Washington State. And yeah, it's been this interesting experience, right? And we had kind of talked earlier this morning about like where I'm at in my life now. And one of the
Mm-hmm.
things that COVID has helped me realize is like, whoa, like what am I working for? I was so busy working and like looking at like kind of a retirement thing later in life, but sacrificing my life now for this idea of something that I want to bring into being in the future.
Yeah.
So that compiled with now like um, my industrial job for the last few years has been involved in living in work camps, um, and the jobs seem to be more dangerous and have to wear more protective gear because of COVID, and just the levels keep going. And then the mandatory testing was going to be implemented every 3 days, and there was a really high false positive rate, and then being stuck in a work camp. And I just felt like it was kind of eating away at me more and more. And then I just had this snap out of it. It's like, no, uh, I love the people that I was working with there. I worked with a great group of people. Was just not willing to work under those conditions anymore. And um, so I was lucky. I got a layoff, and I left, and did another job by Calgary, and just saw how different things could be.
Mm-hmm.
And now not working, and um, yeah, I just feel like a lot of like this coercion kind of happening in society right now. And I'm not saying anything's real or not real or whatever, getting into that debate, but it seems like, I mean, there's a lot of coercion. Like if you want to go flying, that you need to take this vaccine or all the testing and stuff. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but it just seems like a lot of the motivation for me to do any of that stuff wouldn't be for actual health reasons. It would be so that I could go get on a plane, or that so I could go to work. And
Yeah.
and just had to take a step back from that, and really have a look at my own values and what I'm willing to put up with, and what I'm yeah
Yeah.
it's a
And we were talking about this earlier about this unraveling that the whole pandemic has brought on, right? Where like that frame of thinking and that way of going about changing your life may not have happened if this whole situation didn't happen, right?
for
Where
sure.
suddenly this desired shift from being in a place and working in an environment and thinking like, well, I'm just going to be doing this for the next 30 years and I'm going to retire, to have everything shut down, give the opportunity to have more tea sits and more tea ceremonies, and then the synchronicity out of that, of people coming to you and being like, I I want you to host a tea ceremony. And, you're saying that there were a couple people that were in a grieving process, and how the tea ceremony really helped with grieving and with providing them the space and the opportunity to be with someone that's not giving advice, that's not kind of telling them at all what to do. You're just there giving, right? You're just there providing, and in silence, and they can pour their grievances into that tea and into that ceremony. They can
Mm-hmm.
pour themselves into that space without having someone being like, oh no no, it's okay, you don't have to cry, you don't have to do this, oh no no no, you like, there's no interference. It's just, I'm silent, you can grieve, here's my offering that you can put your grievance into, and then enjoy and have this reciprocated process of giving and receiving, which I think is so beautiful. And I think that opens up the experience of tea in a whole new light for people, right? So say, like I was saying earlier, if there's a person listening to this that's like, oh, you know what, I'm gonna start adding um, a kind of ceremonial sense to my tea enjoyment, right? So they go to Tim Hortons, they get a tea, and they stop and they go, okay, thank you for this tea. This is really wonderful. It's going to provide the caffeine that I need to go on with my day. And then suddenly, 6 months later, they're like, I'm going to get a tea set. So they go wherever to get a tea set.
Mm-hmm.
And then they come up on this podcast, right? And then we're talking about, hey, not only can you do ceremony, you can take the state that you're in. You can take whatever is going through you and you can sit with someone in silence and they can provide a space for you to just give that feeling and that emotion or whatever you're going through into the tea, and the tea will give back to you a very visceral experience of how to release more and how to go deeper into the sensations of it. And this is giving me an opportunity to reflect on my way earlier question of have you gone into any profound states of spiritualization or meditation or anything? And I think that is so much more profound to a degree, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where someone can really truly open up to something within themselves that can be healed. And it was something as simple as sitting silent together, drinking tea, right?
Yeah, I have to quote Buddha here, but he often says sitting with tea is like making the ordinary extraordinary.
Mm-hmm.
It's this ordinary thing, right? But it's extraordinary. And yeah, with grieving in particular, I lost my father just over a year ago, and I've definitely had some tea sets geared just for me saying goodbye or having a few words for him, and yeah, it can be quite powerful. And yeah, I've had some teas really affect me, and I can't always say it's the tea, although that's the main variable, but there's a lot going on, right? One of the big things that's happening is I'm sitting down and I'm shutting up and I'm trying to get out of the way, so my own process will come up, whatever I'm processing, right? So that is profound. Just that by itself is super profound. And then also having tea and integrating this being into my body, right? And having it change and affect me and flow. And I mean, it doesn't jar or disturb any of my other processes going on through my day, right? Literally I could sit with tea and be more aware driving to work afterwards, right? And it is a plant medicine, and I don't want to say this in a manner that would deter people from other plant medicines, but I mean, there's some pretty psychotropic plant medicines out there that I might not want to drive a car after, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But and I'm not saying that they're wrong or anything either, right? And I also want to mention one thing about tea that I'm especially grateful for too is the everybody is welcome at the tea table, at least my table, right? And that was one thing that I really picked up from Global Teahot, and they would talk about Muslim clerics and rabbis being able to sit down, and if they talk about tea and enjoy tea, then it's okay, right? And there are tea huts, I guess tea huts, kind of almost like tree forts sometimes, and you'll see that the entrance into these tea spaces is like a little hole, probably 18 inches by 18 inches or something like that, and the idea is that everybody has to equally bend down and bow to go into that space, and that everybody inside that space is now equal. And so that's really important, and I think that gets lost sometimes. I mean, there's a lot of things happening on the planet over the last year, especially. I mean, forever going back, there's a lot of injustices and things happening, and sometimes people are like, oh, well, why aren't these well-known tea people stepping into that? And I mean, at least in my mind, and also the recovery world kind of looks like this, I don't want to align myself and my tea life with any denomination, sect, or politics, for the purpose that everyone is welcome at the tea table. It doesn't matter what your worldview is. I will sit and drink tea with you, right? And in that, we are brothers and we are sisters. You know what I mean? Like, that's really important to me. And I admire, the tea brothers and sisters out there that speak on what they need to speak on, right? But
it serves as its own like bubble, right? Of where there's this protection from the outside world almost. It's like when we come to sit down for tea, this is the focus, right? And I'm sure, there's going to be conversations about all sorts of things, and sure, politics are going to come up if it's going to come up. It's not like there's a strict adherence to like, no, these certain things can't be spoken about. But then there's an appreciation that there's this equanimity between the two people. And I'm remembering a Jet Li movie. Do you know what movie I'm talking about?
No.
Oh my goodness.
He's got some crazy skills for sure.
I think it's in Fearless. Did you ever see Fearless?
Man, like honestly, if you're asking me to remember a certain part of a Jet Li movie, I'm not probably going to remember it other than there's a flying kick somewhere, right?
So he's this champion martial artist that ends up having tea with this like other martial artist.
Oh, okay.
And he essentially learns, not like directly in that moment, but it kind of like clicks in him a little bit that like that there's this safe space where they're having tea, and Jet Li's character like doesn't know the difference between anything, and then this other martial artist is like has this whole technique and is super traditional about his movements and has those like really specific teas, and he's just schooling Jet Li on how in that bubble they're just people having tea. It doesn't matter about their martial arts, it doesn't matter about who they are, it doesn't matter about their accomplishments. And Jet Li just doesn't get it, because to him he's just looking at his opponent, right? And he's looking at the person that he's about to fight, and all he can think about is winning. And yet his opponent is just like, no, drop all that, like forget all that, let's just enjoy the tea. And then it's like way later in the movie where that just dawns on him, right? That he ends up like beating this guy to death, right? And he's just like, oh my God, what have I done, right? And it's actually a really beautiful movie. Like
I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, it's one of my all-time favorite of Jet Li's. Yeah, like that and like Hero.
I kind of like to get a clip of because now I've been sitting with tea, right? I'll notice like a tea scene in a movie.
Yeah.
And there was a really good one actually with Grief in Ghost in a Shell.
Oh yeah.
Right, like where she goes to visit her mom, but she's in a different body, and her mom makes tea and sit down, and there's this like conversation, and I was like, whoa. I mean, that's kind of what tea's about, right? Like we sit and we talk and we have space for each other, and it's like how long have people been doing that, right? Like just sitting down and having tea and listening and holding space for each other. And the martial arts thing that you're mentioning is also really interesting, right? And that may be pretty true in some cases, right? Like outside of the tea world, some people might not get along, but I mean inside we can all get along, right? Maybe that's because the journey is like from the inside towards the outside, so that stuff is actually further away. Like it's not present, right, until we get outside of the tea space, and then we put on those hats, right? So it's kind of like stepping into the tea space. Just take your hat or I'll take my hat off, right, and I'll sit and I'll have tea and try to get out of my own way as best I can. Right?
Yeah, and that way when um, the how do I want to say it, like when the desire to put the hat on, you know, in the tea ceremony, or like in the conversation, the desire to bring it up
Yeah.
can be checked, and and I know this may seem a bit abstract, but where it comes down to the nature of the ceremony of the giving and receiving, right? Where the bubble of that's around us, right? Like that image of getting down onto your knees, crawling into this like tunnel, and then coming into this space where everything is set up, and you're in this whole world of tea ceremony. That there's a filter there that's like, okay, if you're gonna bring your hat, you're gonna put your hat on. There's a filter that's gonna ensure that there's honor and respect, and that the tea is respected, and through that, the person that you are about to um, share your idea with is respected, right? And I think that can be helpful with the world, right?
Totally. Like, I wonder, and it probably does happen. I mean, more so in Asia than here, where it's like you may have like a tea setup and sit in tea before you have a business meeting or something, right? I mean, I've actually used this in the recovery world, where it's like in like a sponsor sponsee kind of situation where somebody's new in recovery, and we'll sit down and we'll have some tea and shut up, and then let's talk, right? And I found that beneficial. And I've also had tea with my mentors in that world too, right? And I enjoy that too, and they give me good feedback on it, so I'm sure that they like it too. And it seems to like open this honest space, right? Where it's like I can share myself honestly. It's like I don't necessarily need you to agree with me, but I know that I've been heard and respected.
Yeah, because you know, and this is a typical label now in the world that we're in, that there's this divisiveness, and there's you know, pitting one group against the other, if it's political or if it's religious or whatever, right? That there's a way to introduce a respect to one another, and why not do it through a medium like this, right? And where the tea providers all over the world, wherever you want to get your tea, can be an inadvertent participant in actually alleviating the divisiveness by having more discourse on the ceremonial aspect of it, right? So, you know, I wasn't thinking about this earlier today when I was like, hey, let's do a podcast where, you know, even people listening to this can now get a sense like, oh, you know, maybe if I participate in conversation with the people around me through the act of giving tea, that just that alone can do something subconsciously psychological, where it'll alleviate the divisiveness, you know? It'll alleviate a kind of tension, because you're immediately giving to someone before even saying anything, right? Before even starting a conversation, you're initially going, here, I want to give to you, and I want you to know that I'm starting with giving to you, And imagine then how that translates to social media, right? Because it's so easy to just jump into conversations and jump into arguments. And because there's no medium of giving there, right? It's totally removed because the in-person interface is totally removed. So I think where if that element's added into people's lives more, then the desire to be divisive on social media will actually be dampened as well, because people just have that more in their subconscious of like, first I'm going to give, then I'm going to add my piece on the conversation. And the giving is a direct action. It's not like, oh, I'm going to give my peace of mind, I'm going to give my opinion. No, it's like, I'm going to give something. And from there, that's going to help bring things in a kind of homeostasis, where then the conversation can actually be like how it is here, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty like in depth. I like the way that your mind works, right? You're really analyzing, trying to see these variables and which one does exactly what. And I look at it maybe from a simpler approach, in that like I know that when I have a conversation with somebody before tea, and then I have a conversation with that same person after tea, it's different. Right? And like it seems like both parties, after having tea, having a conversation, are more open and more receptive to each other. And so even today when we're setting up this podcast, I'm like, no, I mean, I got to drink tea through this podcast, right? Because it eases the authenticity of like what I want to say, and helps me remember like, you know, things. Even through this conversation, I'm like, oh wait, I want to go back to that part, and you know, I forgot to mention this and that and that.
And that's why you know, typically I do an hour, but I'm just thinking like, you know, I just want to show the enjoyment of the process, right? And I know probably some people watching this or listening to this is like, man, how much tea are they drinking? And why, like, how have they not, like, gotten up to go to the bathroom? But I mean, these are small cups. And
they are small cups,
you know, there's some elements at play. A warm room, a little bit of body sweat.
And I really enjoy seeing people share tea with children, right? And how they find that quiet meditative space. It's this natural thing. And I had the extreme enjoyment of sharing tea with my niece and my nephew, and they were just like, I was like, okay, and I gotta be quiet for a bit. And they were just like, they're real careful and paying attention to things, and asking for their feedback after, or like, you know, what they thought of the experience. And it's like my nephew was like, oh, you know, I feel like my thoughts were calmer, and so you felt relaxed. And kind of brings me to another point. So usually when I serve tea, often I'll be asked, well, what's the tea beforehand, and you know, how's it gonna feel, blah blah blah. And I really prefer not to answer any of those questions until after, and even after I've heard that person share on their experience. That's what I like. I believe that's what Wuda refers to as like the beginner mind. Like, I don't want to influence your experience or your relationship with tea by my words beforehand. I mean, I'd rather that people experience it for themselves, and then build that relationship inside themselves. And then if they wish to, they can share some of that, and it's as true and real as it gets, right? Because it's their relationship with whatever tea they just drank, right?
Yeah.
And it's not influenced by words that may come from someone like me that would tell them what kind of tea it is, where it was grown, and all this wonderful stuff, because tea does have wonderful stories, right? But like that experience and that relationship with it, that's the, you know, that's really, really important to me, right? And that's what I'm looking at. But I don't know. It's a bit of a catch-22 because when I go to buy tea, I'm reading the story on the tea and I'm buying it and I know what I'm drinking, right? But
Yeah.
so I try to, like I was saying, get out of my way as much as I can and release that. But if I can help other people experience it without needing to know those stories, then
Yeah.
I enjoy doing that too. Right?
Well, I think too, like especially in a setting like this with a ceremonial aspect, where say you do order your tea, the grower, the merchant, where it's coming from, all these things, right? But then when it comes down to sitting down and having the experience, the process of setting up can take away all that information. It can help push it to the back of your mind. And so then you are stepping up to it. You are sitting down with it in a fresh new way to then just experience it in the moment, rather than if it's coming from a box and you're reading the box and then you have this mind chatter of like, oh, it's coming from this place, there's this company and blah 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 blah. Oh yeah, that sounds great. Oh yeah, it's like mint tea, peppermint. Yeah, peppermint's my favorite. Yeah, this sounds good. I think, oh yeah, I need some soothing in my mind. It's like this mental chatter that's going on. That's like, then the process of making the tea is just tea bagging the cup and boil some water and put it in. You had like the TV going, and then and then you're just drinking this tea and your mind's going.
You have that story going, but all you can taste is the honey.
Yeah, right. And then where in the setting, it's like, okay, all of that is set aside. And here I just need to focus on the placement of all these things. I need to focus on a little bit technique. I need to focus on the process. And then all of that is then leading towards this very like narrow path into the experience of the tea. And then right to the point of then reaching for the cup and drinking it, right? Where there was this like path carved to that, where nothing else is welcome to participate with that in the mind, other than the presence of what the sensations are going to be when you drink, and what information is going to be relayed from just the tactile experiences of the feeling of the tea on your tongue, the taste of it and all your taste receptors, the smell of it, the look of it, and then the feeling of it, right? And then that is what's informing you of everything that the tea is, right? And then after that, you can say to yourself, oh, where it comes from now, there's beauty that's relayed through it, right? There's this sense of projecting all of that feeling into where it's come from, and then the tradition and all of that, right? So
yeah, and I mean, I know I was talking about a focus on like what I consider to be like the beginner mind and that honest relationship without anybody else influencing it, and but the stories are actually really important too, right? Like otherwise, like how do I know what I'm contributing to when I buy tea or things like that, right? So it all kind of works together in the best way that it can. And I mean, this is I've started to dig a hole deep with tea, right? But I'm still pretty new in the journey, and I have a lot of things to learn.
So I think on a final note here, where do you? I want to put this as clear as I can. You've been on this path for 7 years of doing ceremony. Do you have an intention of potentially getting into a role of being a teacher and having a studentship, where like you were saying before, where you're a tea brother, but to the point where you are a facilitator in a more official sense. Like what would that look like?
Um, you know what? I'm not sure. I mean, I've ideas what I would like that to look like, but kind of like with this lineage in this way, it's like they don't really ask to be like an apprentice. You get asked, right? So the things
Mm-hmm.
are like not in my control in that sense. So what I do is I try to be open and honest with where I learned about tea from. Like, so for example, last year I went to a music festival and I was serving tea. I had like kind of a lounge, boiled tea, and then did a few tea ceremonies. And I was in contact with Global Teahot and was like, hey, I'm gonna go out and do this by donation or whatever. And they sent me a bunch of magazines and free tea to give away. So I mean, like, that communication is important to me. So if I'm venturing into new areas of being of service with tea, then I'll have conversations with people, right? So
Mm-hmm.
um, actually, I feel like a conversation coming on, right? Like that will be coming up in the future, maybe even over the next couple of days here. Send off a few notes to Taiwan. Like what I've been noticing um, recently is that people are asking me kind of for private ceremonies for certain things, and I'm okay with that. And as long as the main thing is happening, like I am making tea available publicly and doing that by donation, so it can kind of like carry that gift forward to other people, and other people can gift to other people, kind of thing. As long as that's always happening, then I'm okay with going into other areas, but also like being respectful and having that communication with where I have learned about tea from, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like acknowledging that. Um, yeah, so I can see like, oh man, my life is like really kind of going through this change right now. Let's talk maybe briefly about this. I thought I had a whole bunch of money, a week or so ago, and it turned out that I lost a whole bunch of money, which happens sometimes. And but basically, I allowed myself to think about what I would do with my life if I didn't need to work. And now, despite losing that money, I don't want to lose that vision, right? So I want to
Mm-hmm.
be able to hold space for people and have tea and do other things like breath work and maybe do some like medicinal tinctures. And I've been working with like aloes wood incense for like 6 years too. And so doing some things in those areas, right? And some or all of those things involve conversations with where I was learning these things about, and trying to guide myself into the healthiest space possible with that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, people have all often come to me and asked me for tea too because I got a lot of tea, right? So, I mean, I don't mind helping people find tea too. I also want to be careful with that too, right? I don't want to be, stepping on toes of other people, and I don't want that to be my main mission. I don't want that to be the bus stop I get off at, right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah. So, I mean, kind of what I'm drawn to is holding space for people and allowing them to be vulnerable or whatever they need to be, and like maybe healing trauma, right? I'm
Mm-hmm.
really drawn to that, and it seems to be coming to me. Like there's a lot of happy tea ceremonies, but I've had some people stop by, and I mean they got some things that they were saying, right? And I want to be open to holding space for that. So
Mm-hmm. Wonderful.
yeah.
So, maybe tell people listening, where they can find you, maybe primarily on social media, and also maybe the website of, I think you were saying the global Teahot.
Yeah.
All this stuff will be linked as well, and yeah. So maybe.
So primarily, like my social media, most of the tea things that I do are on Instagram. So
Yeah. So what's your Instagram?
ttom77.
Nice.
Yeah.
And yeah, what's the website of?
globalteahut.com, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, yeah, you can put a link up to both of those. My Instagram setting is private or whatever, but you can send a message still. I think if the settings are private.
They can follow you, and then you'll have to accept.
Right,
follow,
right. But I can chat at that point, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that's good. And I think I mean, depending on how this goes, I want to be available to do ceremonies and potentially like more private bookings, right? So I may develop a website at some point. For that to make easy access, but I mean, right now there's nothing set up like that.
And if you want, I can even put your email in, so people can just contact you directly through email as well.
Sorry, my Instagram is ttom 4.3.
Ttom 4.3.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So with that, thank you everyone for listening in, for watching, sticking around for a little bit longer of a podcast,